Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Certainly the most defining pasuk of Jewish identity, or as the Ramban refers to it as the Sheirish HaEmunah, the foundation of the belief and the commitment of Klal Yisrael throughout the generations. Often the first pasuk that a child recognizes or learns at the beginning of their life, at the dawn of their learning, and often the last pasuk, which is said at the end of life, before leaving this world. Shema Yisrael has got with it probably one of the most powerful messages that the Torah has given us. And yet, what is that message? And what is the word actually, the word Shema itself, what does it mean? I'd like to have a look very briefly at 4 different levels that we find in Chazal and in the Mefarshim of what the word Shema could possibly mean. Now, on the simplest level, Shema is simply Moshe Rabbeinu addressing the Jewish people and getting them to listen, getting them to hear carefully, right? He's saying, listen to what I'm telling you. I want you to hear this. But hearing, the act of hearing, is really only a passive audio experience where we allow sound waves to be perceived by us. And hearing is something we do automatically. We walk in the street, we're hearing what's going on. Hearing itself is not the translation of the word Shema. Hear, O Israel, apart from which, when we recite the Shema twice daily, in the morning and the evening, we're not actually hearing anything. Nobody's saying anything to us at all. So what do we mean when we say Shema Yisrael? What are we hearing when we're saying this? So the word Shema, to hear, as it's usually translated, is in many ways, a misnomer. And it forces us to look more deeply at this key word, shin mem ayin, lishmoya, to hear at a deeper level. So if we go past the ordinary physical perception of sound waves, of audio experience, we go to another understanding of lishmoa in classical Hebrew, which means not to hear, but to listen. So to listen already is more than hearing. People hearing without listening is a common feature of the world in which we live. Hearing, they hear things, but they don't quite pay attention to it. They don't really listen and understand what it means. If you look at the Sforno, for example, he says Shema Yisrael means lehitbonen, which means to reflect, to meditate, to understand it at a deeper level. This is already a completely different experience than hearing. Right? Here we are engaging in something which is of the deepest understanding possible. And in actual fact, in Halacha, we find that this is a requirement when you say Kriya Shema, to have kavanah, to have intention, to pay attention to what you're saying, to the extent that the Shulchan Aruch says if you suddenly wake up and you find that you've been davening on autopilot and you haven't said Shema with kavanah, you have to say it again. Because Shema, saying Shema without kavanah, is a contradiction in terms. Because Shema means pay attention, listen carefully to something and understand and reflect on it completely. In fact, if you listen in the bracha that we say every morning before Kriya Shema, Ahava Rabbah, which precedes the Kriya Shema, the topic of that bracha is learning Torah. And there we give, actually, interestingly, 8 different words, 8 verbs, one after another, describing what the activity of Talmud Torah really requires. And we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please help us to engage in the activity of learning Torah. And for that we need as follows. We need lahovin, ulahaskil, lishmoya, lilmod, ulalamed, lishmor, velasos, ulakayim. 8 different words, describing 8 different levels of engagement in Talmud Torah, 8 different cognitive activities which connect us to the deeper meanings and the perception of Torah itself. According to the Mukubalim, these 8 words correspond to the 8 big day kahuna of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, the 8 special vestments of sanctity that the Kohen Gadol has to wear. Each one of them corresponds to one of these layers of engaging in Talmud Torah. But one of them is, we say, lahovin or lahaskil, we know what bina and seichel are, activities of the mind. And then the third one is lishmoya. So after lahavinu lahaskel comes lishmoya, which means to really understand something at its greatest depth. And this is clearly the second meaning of the word Shema, not to hear with your ears, but lishmoya, to hear with your brain and with your full cognitive capacities to understand something. And what is it you're supposed to understand? And the truth is, libraries have been written about what exactly it means, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. When we're speaking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is one. The word one here doesn't really adequately translate the word Echad in this context, because one we usually use as a mathematical symbol. But here it doesn't mean one as opposed to two. Here it means one in the sense of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is unique and total and the source of all existence and the source of all being and the purpose of all being, that Hashem, that the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu means the unity of the entire universe and the unity of our lives, that the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is really the core being of every member, of every man, woman of Klal Yisrael. Every child should understand. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We have no other goal in mind. Shehakoil boro lichvodei. Everything revolves around the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what we're supposed to be thinking about when we say Shema Yisrael. I remember, incidentally, when I came to yeshiva the first time as a teenager, and one of the extraordinary experiences initially is sitting in a Beis HaMedrash in Kol Torah in Yerushalayim, and I was 17 years old, and it came to Kriya Shema for Mayos. You're talking about a Beis HaMedrash with about 300-400 people in a Beis HaMedrash, and Haboche Ba'ama Yisrael Be'avo, and it's time to say Kriya Shema. And after they finish the bracha, suddenly there's complete silence in the Beis HaMedrash. You could hear a pin drop. And frankly, I got a bit of a shock from that. I'd never seen that or heard that before in my life. And then there's silence for about 10 seconds, which is a long time of silence for hundreds of people. And then everybody said Shema in unison. And the point of that 10 seconds was to reflect and to think about the words you're about to say and to meditate even ever so briefly and focus your mind that you're not just hearing, but you're listening. You're actually not just listening, you're reflecting and understanding what do we mean when we say Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That this is not simply a line in the Torah, not simply a mitzvah. It goes far beyond that. It is really the foundation of the Shoresh Emunah, our commitment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and gives us a great challenge to understand how that can apply in our lives at every moment of our lives. So the first understanding of Shema is to hear. The second is to listen, reflect, and understand and analyze the idea of Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And now we come to the third interpretation, which is really in the Mishnah. The Mishnah in Maseches Brachos, the first Mishnah in the second chapter of Brachos, speaks about Kriya Shema and says that it is in fact an act of Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shamayim. The word Kabbalas Ol here means that when we're saying Shema, we're not just hearing and we're not just listening. It is in fact an act of commitment, a statement of commitment, a type of an oath of allegiance. It's really got to do with identity, about who we are, what sort of people we are and who we are. The answer is Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We are committed and we are completely, our lives revolves around this particular idea. Incidentally, on this particular understanding of Chazal, it's quite clear. People often make a mistake because everything's written in the Siddur. People think that Kriya Shema is part of Tefillah. Tefillah is our prayers. But in actual fact, Tefillah is one thing and Kriya Shema is something else completely. If you look in the Rambam, there's Hilchos Tefillah is one book, and Hilchos Kriya Shema is something else completely. Because Tefillah is in essence a petition. We're turning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and petitioning and asking and requesting and pouring out our needs and to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Whereas Shema Yisrael, there is no petitioning. There is no asking for anything at all. In fact, we're not addressing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are allowing ourselves to be addressed by the Torah. When we're saying Shema, God is talking to us. When we are davening, we are talking to God. Shema and Tefillah are two completely different activities which are intimately connected to each other. That before we can stand in Tefillah, before we can stand before our HaKadosh Baruch Hu and petition God and ask Him for our needs and for our life and for our well-being and for our future, we have to allow the truth of the Torah to address us and hear that we are listening to the words of the Torah. We're listening to the requirement of our commitment and our allegiance to our HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So in that sense, Kriya Shema plays a completely different role, emotionally and intellectually, to the activity of prayer. It's not a prayer. It is something which we are listening to and allowing the truth of the Torah to be absorbed into our mind and into our heart as a preamble to the Tefillah. So that's the third Perush. It's not just an intellectual activity of hitbonenut, as the Sforno says. It is, in fact, a kabbalas ol malchus shamayim. We are committing ourselves and accepting upon ourselves that allegiance. And in actual fact, for example, at Har Sinai, when Klal Yisrael said Naaseh the Nishma. So what does the Nishma there mean? It doesn't mean we will hear it. They've heard it already. Naaseh the Nishma means we will do it, and we are committed. And in fact, the Targum translates Naaseh the Nishma as Na'aved u'nekabel. He translates Lishma there as Kabbalah, which means a total firm commitment. And in that sense, that is the third layer of meaning on the word Shema. And then there is a fourth meaning which takes us into the world of mysticism, and here is brought down here by the Sfas Emes, one of my most favorite Perushim in Parshas Vayischanan, and that is interesting. He makes mention of the fact that whereas Kriya Shema is in Devarim chapter 6, but what have we just had in Devarim chapter 5? The answer is the Ten Commandments. Moshe Rabbeinu reviews for the Jewish people the Aseres HaDibros, the experience at Har Sinai. And at Har Sinai, Klal Yisrael heard the Koil Hashem. They heard the voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Moshe Rabbeinu here in Vayischanan in chapter 5 says, this voice of God is Koil Godol Velo Yosaf. And one of the Perushim of Lo Yosaf means that the voice of God, because it comes from the Ein Sof, it comes from the world of the infinite, never ends. That the same voice of God which said, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and Lo Yir Lecha Elohim Acherim, the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and a denial of any other gods, any other ultimate goals and values in life, that this is the one and only purpose of existence, that this Koil Hashem, this is something which was said once at Har Sinai, but actually continues to be said eternally. It's only that we don't hear it all the time because we're not tuned in to the right radio station. Says the Sfas Emes, when we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, we are trying with our neshama to tune in to the Koil Hashem of Har Sinai. We're trying to hear again the sounds and the message that Klal Yisrael heard at Har Sinai, the Kol Godol Velo Yosaf. And here he says there's a new pshat in the pasuk. Shema Yisrael, what are you listening to? Hashem Elokeinu. So those two words sum up the first commandment, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, that is a reference to the first commandment, and then Hashem Echad, that God is the one and only and unique power and force in the world, that is the second commandment of Lo Yir Lecha Elohim Acherim, of not to have any other gods, not to worship any other values or any other isms or any other ultimate goals, to have only one ultimate purpose in life. This is what the neshama is able to pick up. If you say Shema Yisrael properly, says the Sfas Emes, you can hear the first two commandments, which are still being said by the Koil Hashem from the Ein Sof, Koil Hashem from the world of the infinite. So this is the enormous power which is carried by these six very simple words. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Yes, we're hearing, right? But we are also listening and understanding and engaging our minds cognitively to understand the full meaning of what Achdus Hashem, the Yichud Hashem, really means, which is a life's job to understand it properly. And then there is the third meaning of Kabbalas Al Malchus Shamayim, the commitment and the oath of allegiance as a preamble to the Tefillah. And then there is the possibility that we today, as mere mortals, can still tune in and with the ears of our neshama, to hear the Kol Hashem, Kol Godo V'lo Yosaf, the eternal voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that calls us to lead a life of Kedusha, of Tahara, of Emunah and Mitzvahs, V'chein Yiratzon.